This will be my review of the Lee Cougan Super Gravel. I did a first look video of this, which I'll link in the description below in case you didn't see that video. In that video, I went over all the specs and everything. In this video, I'm going to talk about the ride quality. So the Lee Cougan Super Gravel is basically a monster cross bike. I'm told that across the pond in Europe, they call this a mullet bike, but here in the US, we call it a monster cross bike, which is basically a mountain bike with drop bars. And that's what this is. Everything about this bike is mountain except for the handlebars and the shifters and the brake levers. I'm gonna, at the end of this video, talk about the people that would benefit most from a bike like this. So this bike has 100 millimeters of travel in the front and 30 in the rear, and that's what makes this bike unique. Now, monster cross bikes have been around for a long time. For 20 plus years, people have been taking hardtail mountain bikes and putting drop bars on, but the suspension in this and the very lightweight carbon frame make this a really unique riding bike. So the suspension, 30 millimeters of travel, it has these little pistons inside, and it doesn't really have a pivot. It just uses flexible seat stays and chain stays, and so there's very little maintenance involved in this suspension design. The pistons inside have oil to control the damping, but this has a really fast rebound, which is fine for the application it's made for. You're not going to be taking this bike off jumps where you've got to control the rebound. So fast rebound is good for bumps that come in rapid succession like you experience on a gravel road or even some single track with roots and small rocks. And this bike is not designed for super technical single track, obviously, but I'm going to talk about where it shines on single track coming up here in a few minutes. Now, the first time I hopped on this bike, I felt like the reach was too long for me. So this one comes with a 90 millimeter stem. Now, gravel bikes and road bikes have a shorter reach to compensate for the fact that your hands are out further on these drop bars. But since this is a mountain bike frame, it's really designed to have a long reach, and the bars are traditionally shorter, closer to you than you would be on a drop bar bike. So the 90 millimeter stem I felt was too long. I think it should come with like a 40. So if you get this bike, negotiate with your bike shop to get a shorter stem, because I just feel like most people are going to want the shorter stem. Now, if you're used to a road bike with a really long stem or tri-bars, you're gonna be fine. Now, I did get used to the reach after a few rides, but the first few, I felt like I was really stretched out. I also noticed that the tires, to me, felt a little slow on gravel roads and pavement where the gravel was not too rough. These are 2.25 tires, so mountain bike tires. Because in my head, I'm thinking, I'm on a drop bar bike, I should be going this speed with this effort because I've been riding gravel for so long. I was probably 1 to 2 miles an hour slower on these tires on smooth pavement and smooth gravel. But obviously when you get on single track, they're excellent. So this bike is gonna need to be tuned toward your specifications. So stem length, tires. Now I will say that, like, if you're predominantly going to be using this bike for gravel, and this bike floats on gravel roads, but I'll get to that coming up in a minute. But if you're going to be using this bike for gravel mainly, I would put on like a 50C tire, like a Gravel King 50C tire. But if you're going to be using this bike for 50+% single track, then I would leave these tires on. So you can customize the ride based on the tire. The other thing that I felt like needed to be changed on this bike is the front chain ring. So this one came with a 34, which is fine for what I was using it for. But again, if you're going to be mainly using it for gravel, I would probably put on a 38. Most one-by gravel bikes today, so one front chain ring, come with a 40. A 38 is good for this because the tires are bigger than a traditional gravel tire, and so you don't need quite as tall of a gear. Now, if you're going to be using it for single track, the gearing's fine. I got to where I went above my normal cadence at about 30 miles an hour. So you can go pretty fast with this 34 front chainring, but if you live in a really hilly area where you want to pedal fast down a gravel road, you probably want to go like a 36 or 38 front chainring. So I'll go ahead and mention that. Other than that, I think the bike was just really well spec'd for what it's designed for. So I'm going to talk about the different terrain that I took this bike on, starting with gravel. Now, I do have to ride pavement to connect gravel segments. I personally try to stay off pavement as much as possible, but on gravel roads, this bike absolutely floated. So you come up to like potholes, for example, where on a traditional gravel bike, you kind of like brace for impact or try to bunny hop it. The front end of this bike just absolutely eliminates pretty much anything a gravel road is going to throw at you in terms of bumps. And the back end also is, the back end is not like super compliant, which is good because when you get out of the saddle and sprint, the suspension does not move. There is zero energy loss on this bike when you're out of the saddle. So it does good on just those sharp edged bumps where normally you get out of the saddle, you don't have to. 1-inch roots on trails absorbs those really well. Now, since it's only 30 millimeters of travel, you're obviously not going to absorb like, 3-inch roots. But gravel roads, just super comfortable. Now, like I said, it does feel a bit slower on traditional like type gravel surfaces, but when the gravel surface gets really rough, it's excellent. Now, also, we're in a really dry season right now, and our gravel roads are getting pretty sandy. This bike just goes through sand like there's no tomorrow, whereas a 40C tire might wander around, these 2.25s go right through it. This bike shines on like grassy double track. So grassy double track can be really choppy. So this bike just floats over that kind of stuff, whereas on a traditional gravel bike, you're just getting bumped around a lot. On single track, this bike was a blast. You can't do like super gnarly single track, and you're limited on like steep technical stuff because of how stretched out you are. You're just over the front end more than a regular mountain bike. But you can get into some pretty rough single track on this thing because of the 100 millimeter fork. So basically, anywhere you would take a hardtail mountain bike, you can take this bike. Except for like, there are some steeper technical stuff that I would do on a hardtail that I wouldn't do on this bike. But for the most part, just flowy, fast, choppy little single track, like anywhere you could take a hardtail, you can take this bike. So that kind of leads to the question of who is this bike for? Someone like me, like I'm either on gravel roads, like on a gravel ride, or I'm on a mountain bike ride. And so I don't put together a lot of combination rides where I do both, but this bike kind of opens up that possibility. So this could be like the Goldilocks bike for you if you only want one bike and you ride gravel and single track, single track that's not too rough and technical. This could be your one bike for that kind of riding. But for most of us who have, a gravel bike and a mountain bike, this bike basically just adds a whole nother creative level to your riding. Now, obviously, if you're doing really long gravel races or rides and you just need that compliance, that comfort, this bike would be great. You're going to be slower on the smoother stuff initially, but for example, when I was comparing hardtails and full suspension, I felt like on the hardtail I was faster at the beginning of a ride or race, but I was faster on the full suspension at the end as my body got tired and I just needed that comfort. So this bike is going to be that same category where if you're doing really long gravel rides, yeah, you'll be faster on a traditional gravel bike initially, but as your body gets fatigued, having the compliance on a bike like this is going to help you feel fresher and probably go faster. When I started riding this bike, I was like, is this kind of a niche bike or is this a bike that's for the masses? And it's really going to depend on your use case. For me, it's a niche bike because I've got 3 mountain bikes in my stable and a gravel bike. So I've got the whole range covered. But again, this bike just kind of adds that creativity level to the type of ride you can put together. And really, the more I rode this bike, the more I enjoyed it. When I first hopped on it on a gravel road, it just felt so different. Like the front end, because it was absorbing everything, it was just a weird feeling. That's all I can say. Now, I want to mention one more thing, is this bike did not have a lockout. This is a pre-production model that came with the top cap assembly that is made for a remote lockout, but it doesn't have a remote lockout. I'm told that the final production has the lockout that's on the fork, which is great because I don't know even where you'd put a remote lockout on this bike. I guess you could maybe put it up here on the handlebars and jimmy rig some kind of mount, but on the fork is perfect. So this bike needs a lockout because there are smoother gravel roads where you just don't need the front suspension and it just limits your ability to get out of the saddle and go up hills. Like I said, it's a very unique bike that's really going to depend on your use case. It's going to fit the bill for a lot of you out there who need a more comfortable gravel bike, or you want a bike that can do single track and gravel. That's really what this bike's made for. So that's going to wrap it up for my review of the Lee Cougan Super Gravel. Any questions or comments, drop those below. Thanks for watching.